Well, initially I thought I'd just continue what happened in a way. In the first talk, I wanted to talk about the Möbius strip as a dynamic model of the psyche, the relation of psyche and body. But it became so complicated that I thought I'll start with the fundamental questions underlying those thoughts. The whole model of the Möbius strip I introduced last 2 years ago with animation I brought with me. I can't show it right now, but maybe it makes sense later on. We can talk about it. I thought about this relation of George Spencer Brown and Wilfred Bion for quite some time now, and now try to really get my hands on it and make it more concrete. And to begin with, I might just read a little introduction. Relating George Spencer Brown's thinking to psychology, Wilfred Bion would not have been the first choice, since Spencer Brown's relationship to R.D. Laing is well attested for, and invites to try to understand how their thoughts correspond. R.D. Laing wasn't particularly fond of Bion. One might say he misunderstood Bion, but comparing Laing to Bion will be another topic. Mistakenly, I thought Bion wrote poems. I could not at least find any poetry he wrote, but he certainly had a love for poetry. His most famous patient was Samuel Beckett, although it seems the analysis was complicated and frustrating for both of them. Bion and Spencer Brown share a space of genealogical thinking, abstraction and notation, and a language for the processes of form. And I won't bother you with any biographical details, just the date of birth. That's 1879, and he died in 1979. So in relation to Spencer Brown, would be rather a father figure, generationally speaking. And maybe I'll just mention those 4 books to kind of allude to a similarity. Learning from Experience, it's a trilogy in that respect. Learning from Experience, Elements of Psychoanalysis, and Transformations. And then a book which reflects it and kind of shaped his, so people thought of him as the mystic of psychoanalysis. So, and that relates mainly, I think, to his metaphysical observations or constructions he produced. So I prefer to look at how they communicate, Spencer Brown and Bion, by looking from inside out rather, and think with both of them. And since you have knowledge of Spencer Brown, it might help you to understand Bion. So very fundamental problems. What is thinking? What is a thought? So we could think of that as a metapsychological reformulation of the metaphysical questions. Why is there rather something than nothing? So we could say, why is there rather understanding than confusion? And this relation between understanding and confusion is really fundamental for the thinking of Bion. Why do we have thoughts, and how can thoughts be understood by someone else? How can we understand each other at all? Those questions are at the beginning of it. So in that respect, topological speaking, we could say, how does psychic space develop? That lies the groundwork for thinking. What are the distinctions necessary for mental faculties to make distinctions? What are the distinctions necessary to allow for the reflection of such ability? Or, quoting Spencer Brown in the last sentence of the book, how can we arrive at a point where we see that the first distinction, the mark and the observer, are not only interchangeable, but in the form identical? Do you have some water, maybe? I'm sorry. Um, um, to start, I have to build the Freudian argument basically by introducing you to the first model of the psychic apparatus he provides in the interpretation of dreams, where he writes, thank you. All our psychic activities proceed from inner or outer stimuli and terminate in innovations. We thus ascribe to the apparatus a sensible and a motor end. At the sensible end, we find a system which receives the perceptions, and at the motor end, another which opens the locks of motility. The psychic process generally takes its course from the perception end to the motility end. It's perception and the motility end. We assume that a first system of the apparatus takes up the stimuli of perception, but retains nothing from them. That is, it has no memory. So we can simplify that model. We take, therefore, the reflex apparatus as a form of distinction, so that a stimulus on the one side cannot reach the other side without crossing it. But it is an apparatus with no memory, thus a simple indication, a transition of force, a stimulus that excites this apparatus of perception and the motor end, as if nothing happened. So I'll give you an example, a force traveling through a body unnoticed by the body, as if nothing happened. Second example, imagine all your nerve ends being stimulated at the same time, as if nothing happened. And remember that state as a confusion of everything and nothing, as if nothing happened or as if everything happens. So Freud continues then to develop another system on top of that system he calls the memory apparatus. Behind this, there lies a second system which transforms the momentary excitement for the first into lasting traces. This would then be a diagram of our psychic apparatus. That's how he scribbles it out. So regarding to the first example, that would be a train traveling through a tunnel with its wheels being counted, as if something happened. A special function was instituted, which had periodically to search the other worlds in order that its data might be already familiar with if an urgent inner need should arise. This function was attention. Its activity meets the sense impressions halfway instead of awaiting their appearance. We now have an indication proper, a lasting trace of distinction that indicates it with memory. Since we know that there can be no distinction without motive, and there can be no motive unless contents are seen to differ in value, we can now assume that lasting traces become another force, the function called attention. So we thus have a force that excites the apparatus and transition of the force through it, and a force, namely attention, that reverses this course and counters the force. Now a question regarding Spencer Brown. Can we assume all three states of force to be part of every form of distinction? Is a mark the notation of a force? Is a force a signal? Can a signal have intent? So what I do now, like I'll modify this memory apparatus model and towards the attention. I call this form a sense organ for the perception of psychic qualities. That's Freud's definition for the rudimentary consciousness. Since we have the habit that all our psychic activities proceed from inner or outer stimuli and terminate in innovations, we can assume that this is kind of an inner stimuli which reverses the direction. So we have the reflex apparatus as an apparatus which seems to be alive but can't recall. Or we have the memory apparatus, an apparatus that is alive and can recall. Arguably, every living organism has memory, since it is, as a body, a space of distinction. Again, with a stimulus that excites the body, a transition of a force, and a force that counters this force. That force will be memory. So phylogenetic and ontogenetic memory are related. So the question is how to relate to them. Just briefly, second sentence of Spencer Brown's book, the skin of a living organism cuts off an outside from inside. So we could think of a very kind of rudimentary body, one cell, the amoeba, proteus. This life form basically can draw distinctions by inclusion of value. It has a content and an intent. Maybe we can consider that as the shallowest space of that distinction of organisms in general. So it has a potential organic development and knows no frustration, just dies when it gets no food, turns into nothing or everything. So the ontogenetic form, in contrast to that, would be a phylogenetically developed body that arrived at a point where it became a sense organ for the perception of psychic qualities, with the ability to distinguish, value, name, and acknowledge sensual facts, that is, feelings. And contrary to the other form, it has the potential development of psychic space and develops consciousness of frustration and later of death. But to relate philo and ontogenetic form, we need to introduce a concept on the frontier, as Freud says, between the mental and the somatic, as the psychical representative of the stimuli originating from within the organisms and reaching the mind. So, and that I found very interesting, the formulation on the frontier. And maybe we can think of the concept of the drive, so fundamental to Freud, as a mark or a distinction as a force. So a mark indicating the space of psyche and soma, a distinction that requires an indication. If distinction is a force, which we could discuss, the drive would be the mark in the space of the body, and the psyche, the marked state of the body. What is the mark in the space of the psyche? So we have this kind of just mapped it out basically as a phylogenetic development, an anorganic space, distinguished in an organic somatic state by force of life, and that gains a life on its own. A somatic space distinguished by a psychic space, a force of a drive, a life within a life of its own. And a psychic space distinguishing a state of thought, that maybe it would be a force of reason. I don't exactly know how to describe that. A life within the life of its own. I leave the hints to Spencer Brown simply there, so I don't know how to make sense of it. I'll give you an example, the sucking reflex of the newborn as a special example of the reflex model. So that will be the mouth and the stomach, the relation between the mouth and the stomach. The sucking reflex is an innate reflex of contraction, a phylogenetic body memory that we as mammals, but also as amebes, somehow inherited. the phylogenetic body memory allows for ontogenetic traces of psychic quality. So, and that's a good important moment of Kleinian theory. Melanie Klein, the teacher of Wilfred Bion, the founder of the British branch of psychoanalysis. And they basically insisted on the fact that the early infant knows no inside nor outside. So the breast within the sucking reflex would appear as a part object. So the breast is a part object of the sense organ that is introjected. So there's no psychic causality yet. There are just states. And so those states in that somatic form, we could describe as attention fulfilled, as a form of condensation, a growth, affirmation, as a marked state, or as an attention unfulfilled and a lack. That would be an unmarked state, no food. So, but lack causes pain, and that would be linked to the psychic form. That the mouth now, the sucking reflex, produces psychic qualities. So we could think of the distinction of continence, which serves the homeostasis of the organism and the growth, and the psychic quality of pain and lack. In Melanie Klein's terms, that would be the good breast and the bad breast. The good breast is basically everything. It lays the foundation on which the distinction is made. And the bad breast is a very curious object because it actually represents as an object nothing, the lack of something. And that's the interesting start for Bion in his thinking and development of psychic space, that we have a psychic element that's actually a no thing to begin with. And that's the problem the psyche has to deal with and has to react to. There are two different reactions towards that. It could be either the evacuation of the bad breast, the cancellation, getting rid of the problem, or the transformation into the good breast. That will begin a condensation. And those two answers towards the bad breast, I try to lay out here briefly. That will be the transformation of lack into a good breast, the replacement of pain with the memory of a good breast. So that is something Freud would call hallucinatory wish fulfillment. So we have a memory of the good breast, and it connects to the question of, it answers to the bad breast, and it produces a continence, an act of self-pacification, an initiation of a development towards tolerating pain, awaiting the outer stimulus, awaiting the realization of the milk coming in, and the feeding or receiving milk or receiving love from the mother. The evacuation of the bad breast as the second option, the second answer, would be rather similar to the reflex model. So we know this phenomena that pain replaces perception. We can't really, if we are in pain, can't really perceive things. It hinders our ability to perceive. And then pain erases also memory. It's very hard to remember things in a state of pain. And so I think of that rather as a form of cancellation. So, and that results like in the real life as a phenomena in bodily expulsion of the child is crying, it's kicking, it's floundering, urinating, defecating, acts intended, in Bion's words, to rid the psyche of accretions of stimuli, to get simply rid of those elements. And those accretions of stimuli he calls beta elements. And beta elements can only be distinguished by the attentive body as a painful accretion, as something that accumulates and the body needs to get rid of. In contrast to that, and there will be the transformation of lack into memory, would be he calls alpha elements. And those are beta elements that are marked by the sense organ for psychic qualities through the force of attention. And this operation relies on something he calls an alpha function, the psychic form that makes the distinction by indicating states. So maybe I'm now operating a bit more with Spencer Brown's notation. We could think of an arrangement as a complex of psychic elements, like a complexity of feelings felt at the same time. In this case, negative feelings. The simplified arrangement would show that it's unmarked, and the question for the child would be, in the state of pain, how can unmarked be changed into marked? And that's the construction. I'll try to explain this fundamental movement Bion, but also Melanie Klein prepared. So if we distinguish between the child and the mother, and the situation of the good breast, that we would have like an unmarked state that is projected into the good breast, that is the mother. And the mother is a marked state. So it enters this marked state, and it transforms the negative, the unmarked state into a marked state. And that marked state is projected back into the child, and the child interjects the unmarked state as a marked state. And that will be the general mechanism of pacification. So the bad breast, on the other hand, would be the mother who can't fulfill this function and projects back an unmarked state that results in no thought, no development, no feeling. But yeah, so that whole process of pacification, the ability of the mother to pacify the child would be something that Bion calls reverie. And it functions, and then he's using those terms, container, contain would be exactly this function of the transformation of projected beta elements into the mother, the transformation of beta elements into alpha elements digested by the mother towards and back into the baby. So the baby basically through those processes, through this exchange, builds a tolerance of frustration by integrating this ability to contain its own unmarked state and transform it into a marked state. And that would be something we could call experience or learning. So, and yeah, that would be basically the model of the ability to tolerate and change frustration, and the ability to digest feelings, and hold on. Yeah, I'll just finish this briefly because there's something at the end I have to get to. Yeah, so that will be basically a state where nothing can be thought. Nothing becomes something that can be thought of. Okay, and now I give an example from Spencer Brown's autobiography to finish up. So Spencer Brown was not particularly fond of his mother. People might know. He actually wanted to kill her, and he describes it quite at length in autobiography. He starts autobiography with that wish to kill his mother, and ends in the last chapter, which is actually called My Father instead of My Mother, although he talks a lot about his mother in this chapter. I'll just read it to you. The time to have killed my mother was just after my father's death, before she had made a will. I had a brilliant opportunity to do so when she fell behind my car, which got stuck in the mud on our real estate near East Ravensdale. It was dead of night, with not another soul present. It would have been simple to back up and run over her, several times, if necessary. A tragic accident, with no one to blame and everybody very sympathetic to me. Again, I couldn't bring myself to do it. At the moment of opportunity, I thought if there were too many tire marks on her body after the accident, I would almost certainly have to defend a charge of murder. So at the very most, I could afford 2 transits, one backwards and the other forwards, to uncover her body. If she was still alive and conscious after this, I would have to get out of the car and finish her off. Being medically trained, I knew how to. So, and that's probably the nastiest way to talk about the 2 axioms of laws of form. So yeah, you can understand the value of the call made again is the value of the call. That will be the crossing of the boundary. The mother can be identified with the value of the content. That would be the death wish. 2 transits to recross is not to cross, so no death wish at all. So we have the situation again of the question of memory. We could then furthermore, in this respect, regard the body of the mother that is crossed in Spencer Brown's fantasy as the circuit that counts the wheels of the train entering and leaving the tunnel, the initial problem that led to the writing of Laws of Form. Spencer Brown continues, she had struggled and suffered to bear me. Alone in the house, with no other soul present to witness or assist at the birth. Her fantasy that I would grow up to be a credit to her has been fulfilled, even though she refused to acknowledge it. The mother, indeed, thus becomes the first distinction, the empty house, the space shaped by the distinction. The form brings forth a mark of distinction copied out of the form into such another form, a token of the mark, a name of the marked state, the child named George. George Spencer Brown has integrated his mother by making her the center point of his theory. Can we conclude he reconstructed the laws of the mother? He kept her fantasy to be a credit to her, even though she refused to acknowledge it, and even though she disinherited him. By writing Laws of Form, he was able to acknowledge her against her torturous nature, but only in writing autobiography, he was able to forgive her. Last slide. She may have appeared heartless, but I still loved her too much to end it like that. Writing this has moved me to tears. My psychiatrist never forgave her, but I now do, wholly and completely. It was necessary for me to write this biography because I had not forgiven her when I began it. Writing it has released me. Thank you, reader, for being here with me and for sharing the moment of forgiveness with me. My mistake was to think it was cowardice and weakness that prevented me from killing her. I know now it was love. Thank you.
That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay,
Very beautiful.
well, we begin with Lou.
It's very interesting that you could interpret the laws of calling and crossing, one as good and the other as evil. And yet, when you look at them, you realize you could have flipped that. You can think of the law of crossing as good, relaxation, and so on, even in the psychological levels, so that we're confronted again with the fact that at the form, there is no distinction between good and evil.
Exactly. And I think that would be also a very fundamental moral, ethical statement of psychoanalysis. You'd rather look at the forms and the dynamic, the flow of energy, of forces, to get a better understanding of the conflicts at hand, to analyze the conflicts and to get a better access to the person with the conflicts acting out, and a better idea of the mechanisms behind that. Yeah.
Very good. I know there are more questions right here. I think we have maybe time for another one or two,
Comments?
but we're going to cut to the lunch break. Yeah, who's that?
Diego Licio.
Yeah, go ahead, Diego.
Oh, thank you very much for your talk. Two things. Perhaps the first one is, in fact, Freud's approach has turned into what in biological psychology bases consciousness in terms of feelings and emotions. Now, this is the mainstream of present neuroscience in the work of Carl Friston, together with psychoanalyst Mark Solms, in which homeostasis, the search for homeostasis, is the primal intent which constructs consciousness as a scanning of the state of homeostasis.
5 more seconds. 5 more seconds.
Yes, so this constructs, the construction of this in terms of calls a Markov blanket, which is essentially is the Klein bottle that Friston is unable to see as self-penetration. So indeed, Freud comes together with the distinction, and what comes out of this is the Klein bottle. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I think, yeah, there was definitely some correspondences in your and my talk, and I was curious to look into that a bit more closely, because yeah, what would come next in my conceptualization of the relation of psyche and body would indeed be the introduction of the Möbius strip as a body, indeed as a saturated body, as a but I can't really go into this. I would maybe like that. If you think of the Möbius strip being fed, and it's getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and you end up with a torus, and thus you would have a very, very simple organism that can eat and defecate.
Well, the fact is, the anatomy physiology is overlaid, and also it's the mammal heart, it's an overlaid movie strip, which from the somatosensory, from the skin, as Freud called it, the surface,
Yes.
which introduces the world and also returns through motor action. So indeed, this is the case. So yes,
All right.
indeed.
Yeah. I think we do have to.
But the
wrap it up.
unity of action and perception, cognition, goes not as much as the movie strip, but as through the Klein bottle.
Yeah, that's
And
something I need to look at. Yeah.
It'd be
yes,
interesting to think of this distinction as the flesh in the sense of Dieter Onzu, the ego flesh. I'm not sure how if he comes from Klein, but the psychoanalyst and Jacob Rogozinski develops this further, a student of Michel Henry, but from psychoanalysis as well.
Okay.
There's so many,
Yeah.
so much here, and this is truly a poetics of abstraction to be thinking of the Klein bottle eating and defecating or whatever. But I think that at this time we do need to roll into our lunch break. Since we need to eat and defecate, etc. To evacuate. So let us evacuate. Let us take Till, and we will get back on our schedule after just a 15-minute coffee break now. So
Right.
thank you, Till.
Thank you very much.
thank you.